Recording started.
Okay, good evening and welcome to this evening's meeting of the Woodbury County Zoning Commission. Today's date is October 16th, 2023, and the time is 6 o'clock p.m. or 5 o'clock p.m. Sorry. Tonight's meeting will be audio taped and minutes will be prepared. In respect to all parties, we ask those present turn off cell phones or set to vibrate. Those in attendance are asked to legibly complete the attendance sheet up on the front table. Because this is strictly a special meeting work session for utility scale solar energy systems. We're not going to go through the whole process of a public meeting that'll rule on any other type of agenda item other than what's shown tonight. So first of all, a roll call. Let it reflect that all commissioners are here tonight. Do we have anybody in the public that want to comment on anything not on this agenda? No one on the phone either, I take it. So the next item then on the agenda is the item of business, which is a work session for proposed utility scale solar energy system zoning ordinance amendment. Dan, do you want to read that into the record?
Yes. Okay, the purpose of tonight's meeting gathering of the zoning commission is to look at some possibilities as far as looking at this issue surrounding the possible permitting of utility scale solar energy systems, and which the information that was put out on the agenda puts out a kind of a level of different considerations or options to look at, and we'll kind of go through them in these respective categories. The considerations are looking at the county's development plan and future land use map, which is definitely a foundation of any type of ordinance development or permitting that we go back and definitely look at and justify. Other options are looking at the retention of the existing zoning districts, the present locations and the process with some added requirements. And the added requirements could likely be conditional use permitting features, added expectations to the current process. Another possibility is the establishment of a utility scale solar energy systems overlay district. Another possibility is to look at the concept, which is quite in the early stages, of agri-solar utility scale systems. And then, of course, one of the concepts of consideration would be the retention of the current policies on hand, no changes to the ordinance. And so one of the initial pages of the packet includes a discussion outline on all of these respective features. And so the role of the work session is to get into some more of the details and some potential direction on where the commission may consider going as far as the recommendation. I think we're all very mindful of the harvest season going on. And so it's imperative that we respect that and have ample opportunity for future meetings that will look toward adopting some type of recommendation when we can engage in further public hearings. But as was mentioned in previous meetings, it's essential that we kind of look at some of the nuts and bolts by virtue of looking at the respective concepts at place. And so staff has prepared kind of a background outline on some of these items that were in the backup material. And I'll just kind of briefly kind of run through an overview and kind of make it clear on each one that I'll start through and discuss. And so I'd like us to look at consideration number one. Consideration number one within the packet, packet page 5 or page number 3, that's where it starts a summary. So I think it's essential that we talk about the county's general development plan. Established back in 2005, the development plan established a map that locates where the appropriate areas of development are as far as the county. And so to summarize, one of the possible options is to look at this discussion in the wider scope of the general development plan and the future land use map to maybe identify potential areas that might be suitable for possible expansion of general industrial or limited industrial zoning districts as a consideration to make expectations clear for applicants, landowners, and the general public. And the development plan, for example, has language in there where it says fully explore alternative renewable energy sources. It indicates particularly wind generation facilities, both as a combination to the total energy needs of the county as a new source of income for the property owners. You'll notice there that it's pretty broad where you can interpret solar. You can specifically interpret wind as there's a reference. But if you're going to debate the development plan, you might want to have some language or consideration that adds a nod to some of these respective proposed technologies. So fully explore alternative renewable sources, or simply not reference the wind and leave it kind of broad. The existing development plan right now today facilitates the permitting. The county decided back in 2005, 2008, the kind of county we want to be over the next 20 years or so within this plan to recognize where the agricultural locations are located and to recognize where the industrial locations are located. So there's always a potential of looking at the development plan, which, by the way, we all know is coming up here likely pretty soon. It might be an idea to look at this in the spring as far as debating the future energy needs of the county, as far as the future land use map as a basis for potential changes to the respective ordinance. Okay, the second consideration is retain the current permitting procedures in the county ordinance, but add additional requirements to the conditional use permitting process to make expectations clear for the applicants, area landowners, and the general public. And so right now, the general industrial district is where these could be considered. The permitting mechanism would be the conditional use permit, following the same process that we have now, Zoning Commission, Board of Adjustment. The current process in place, there's 500 feet from the project area. And just an example of what I just said about the development plan. Consideration number 2, we look at, we have economic development policies in the county. We have agricultural policies in the county. We have environmental policies in the county. And there's 2 major pillars that we have. The development plan does have openness, as I mentioned, to renewable energy sources. So yes, we do have justification in the development plan, and the county decided at the time that utility or industrial aspects can be considered in industrial areas. Agricultural policy 3.4, it's directly enumerated in there as another pillar to protect prime farmland as determined by high corn suitability ratings. They use the example of 65 CSR from conversion to other land uses. They discourage non-agricultural uses in prime farmland areas and other agricultural districts by providing residential lot size requirements and proper separation distances between residential and agricultural uses. We have environmental policy 7.3. establish standards and practices to encourage preservation of environmentally sensitive areas such as wetlands, woodland areas, waterways, streams, ponds, lands, rivers, etc. And then we have compatible with conservation and environmental policy, establishing grading standards that create development sites, minimize erosion and sediment and water runoff. These standards may encourage conservation of less developable sites, particularly in steeper slopes. And so reason I run those ideas off, or those development plan justifications is those are the broad approaches as we start looking at ordinances, concepts to hang our hats on as far as looking for a respective balance. And the balance at the time, based on the conditional use, does capture this as far as the county deciding whether an area is appropriate or not. The next consideration is a utility scale solar energy systems overlay district. This here requires an application to be reviewed by the zoning commission and considered for approval by the board of supervisors that must meet a specific criteria of appropriateness and whether an area in the county would be appropriate or not for solar. And so an overlay district could be a concept where you rezone to the overlay district, but have a set of standards, whether it's CSR, whether it's slope or other criteria that the board can look at as far as making an area eligible or not for that respective conditional use. And the fascinating part about this is the debate is whether or not an area is appropriate for that. That's very similar to a conditional use, but putting a C in the agricultural preservation column is county-wide as far as an area where you come in to the zoning commission, to the board of adjustment, and you ask these two boards for the ability to locate that there. A overlay district, what it does is it retains the prohibition blanketly across the agricultural preservation district, but it makes the conditional use eligible in an area by virtue of the board of supervisors and the zoning commission considering for that to be rezoned. The fourth option, and we can talk a bit more about that later on, kind of copies the third as far as maybe exploring the agricultural side, the agricultural use of these on retaining a farming operation and finding a way for the solar to coexist. And then the fifth option is, and the zoning commission has full ability, depending on the recommendations chosen, to retain the policy that is in place in the ordinance. And the supervisors, of course, have offered some direction as far as concepts that they would like for the commission to include in there, whether it's, of course, slope, whether it's, of course, looking at the soil content to see if an area is appropriate, the public notice area being extended out to 1 mile. And I did include that sheet in there on their latest direction to the commission. With that said, I'd probably like to turn it back over to the chair and for discussion, yes, for the board.
Okay. Any questions presented for our consideration? Concerns? Clarification needed?
If I may, if we turn to page 8. Page 8, under the consideration number 2, shows a potential, and again, this is a draft, a potential conditional use permit ordinance that can be used in two ways. This criteria could be used to complement the current permitting process. In other words, somebody comes in for a conditional use permit, and if we go down through it, you will find that it creates a relationship between the zoning commission and the board of adjustment and the board of supervisors to be all hands on deck as far as a path for the permitting process. And I'll give an example. We go to page 13 when it starts talking about the permitting process, and it brings in a series of agreements that would have to be part of the relationship. Right now, or back at page 16. Okay, and so basically, under the current conditional use criteria, which you all know very well, somebody brings the application to the zoning commission, you review the nature of the area, you make a recommendation back to the board of supervisors, or excuse me, board of adjustment. The board of adjustment weighs everything that the commission weighed, but the fact that we have a series of items that we need to look at protecting as far as the road system, which came about, of course, in the wind debate. We've got to look at public drainage system protection, maintenance, decommissioning. There's a chance to have agricultural mitigation plans to protect, grading plans, vegetation management plans, emergency response plans, wildlife. And so there's a series of plans there that can be presented to the Board of Supervisors for review and approval. And they must meet those requirements through the board before the Board of Adjustment could grant a permit. And we'll say this as far as, we'll say in the existing world, if we pass this ordinance and keep it strictly general industrial only, then you would run through it and have this list of expectations that the applicant would have to meet. If you were to look at going toward a utility scale district, then that can keep the essence of this in place. But then you've got to go back now and look at aspects of how do you grant the rezone? What criteria is it that needs to be put into place to grant a rezone? And so keeping in mind the development plan and the two areas in there that could be pillars to hang on the development plan, we've already made it known that CSR is a consideration right now if you were to switch over to another district. The development plan backs that up, and that's part of it. We also have language in there for soil erosion and slope and those ideas. And so that could be considered as part of an overlay district as well. And so kind of jumping ahead here, if we look at 27 and jump into the third consideration there on that overlay district, here is some possible language, packet page 9, page 27. The utility scale district, you could go in there and come up with concepts as far as corn suitability rating. You could have language in there about farmage usage, slope, etc. And so I know at the very beginning here, this seems like information overload because of so many different options and so many paths. So I think that maybe to kind of lead discussion, maybe if the board wants to talk about it as far as what the current process is, or as that conditional use permit process, so that we can kind of think about what the commission goes through. The aspect of the thought process. When an application is brought to the commission, and I know many of you have lived this, you work on a plan to make a recommendation to the supervisors, typically on CSR. So let's kind of talk about that a little bit. That's fine. Well, that's consideration number 5. So what do we need to look at when we look at an area for rezone? What would you say?
Are you talking specifically CSRs then, or just in general?
Just in general, our current process for if somebody were to, let's just say right now, somebody wants a solar field, and they bring us an application hypothetically, and we find out that these parcels are directly in the middle of the county. Let's just say we get that application hypothetically, it comes in. What are some of the criteria we look at right now?
You're gonna look at how it fits in with the surrounding area directly. Or is it suitable? What type of negative repercussions are the surrounding property owners gonna experience? That's kind of how you start. And then you have the criteria that you've explained that we look at. Basically, is this gonna fit and is it gonna work? And is there gonna be 30 people at the meeting complaining because you're doing this? And that's, I guess, the process I like, because you can listen to people and they can respond to whether they do want it or don't want it in their area and reasons why it would work or won't work.
Especially with, is that you can make adjustments according to the needs that you hear that night too. You're not locked into too much, so that you don't have the flexibility to adapt. If somebody's looking for a certain setback, like there's might be 500 foot away from something that's not enough. The environmental impact, traveling the roads, what does it have on the services the community provides? CSR is another one. I mean, according to suitability rating, but I don't think that's always a good gauge, especially when we're talking this in an industrial area. I think a lot of our industrial area CSRs are a lot higher than 60 or 65 right now. And they're considered industrial just because of the location that they're in. So I'm not sure if CSR is just a good mix. I'm not sure if, because if you're talking 1% slope, not a lot of grade variation, but that's.
Okay, what I'm getting at too is we go to the development plan on much of the policy and we do look at the map. And the map is one of the indicators for sure on whether an area is appropriate or not. I've been asked many times on spot zoning. We don't have a big write-up in there on what spot zoning is. We have a definition in the packet, but I've had folks say to me, well, you don't have the prohibition of the spot zoning in the packet. Therefore, somebody should be able to come and ask to rezone to that. And there's not a big thing in the spot zoning realm. We've been told, in our trainings and the best practices, and it's a custom in zoning that you do not spot zone. And the development plan backs that up. And that's what I'm getting at is on that future land use map. Because we're looking at this, the first thing would be to pull that map up on the screen and say, this land. Okay, it's probably not best to put it there based on the mapping and what the public has found.
Stay on the door, okay? You guys go outside and play. And
What
don't
I'm
run back.
getting at is the development plan under consideration number 1. If we were to take the development plan approach, you can debate and discuss the type of county you want to be through 2040. Right now, working with Simcoe and other areas and processing comments and much of the meetings up to this point, it seems that the county residences, and they'll be continue to be asked, but we haven't seen a huge request coming from the public on repainting the mapping as far as the county laying out, these grand new industrial areas. And that would be helpful as far as the development plan, as far as the long-term planning, absolutely. So that's something to consider. However, development plans are written wide, at wide angle, and that's why I read those terms off to you. If we're to look at the development plan specifically, and we're looking at an ordinance as far as either putting the C in and allowing the county-wide debate on an area inside the conditional use. We see what the supervisors had brought us as far as the request to look at that balance. They mentioned industrial, creating possibly future industrial areas, industrial opportunity. To do that, you have to amend the development plan map to really have that back it up. An overlay district is a different tool that looks at, of course, the development plan is part of it, but when we get back to 2008, and I know some of you, Tom and Chris, were through that process when you looked at the land use summary table, you looked at the development plan, and you probably had past work sessions on those ordinances where you ultimately decided where the Cs and the As and all those things go. And so at some point, you learned in that process that the Cs go here and they do not go there based on that level of planning. Now, so if we have the new level of planning that, is very clear and tells us that the Cs can go in there or not go there, or looks for a different process, what the overlay district does is it actually offers a level of flexibility. And I've talked to Scott County about this. Scott County has an overlay district, the same kind of scenario we're talking about, where their development plan backs up the protection of agriculture. They have that pillar, but they do have some openness to renewables coming in and being part of the community. And so they took the concept of smart planning. It's actually a field of thought. And they created the overlay district scenario to retain the agriculture aspect, the base district, and lay it on top. But they made the threshold to get that overlay district based heavily on CSR. That's the mechanism that they use to take the rezone procedure to the zoning commission, to the board of supervisors, and scrutinize that area on ag land, whether it's appropriate or not for that district. That's how they do it. That's kind of the strong end there. You have other counties like Lynn County that do the same thing with an overlay district, but they don't put so much reliance on CSR. They have a kind of a rubric or a checklist that they go through. The zoning commission reviews, board of supervisors go through, and they ultimately approve the permit. But they have a scale on a 100-point system that you have to go through, where if you have a certain level of CSR, you'll get so many points. If you they even have language in there. If you do goodwill payments to neighbors, you'll gain some points. You do agricultural mitigation techniques, soil protection techniques, you can gain some points in there. So they kind of take a balanced approach as far as offering at least some possibility on land that might have a level of CSR. So what happens with the overlay district, and the zoning administrator over, and as Scott had told me, that it's a creative way that is not contrary to their development plan, but it's in a lot of ways we know an overlay is very similar to a conditional use, but it brings in the supervisors as far as a part of the process, as far as the rezone being the trigger in order to allow for consideration there. The one thing that Lynn County does is they have the supervisors ultimately deciding the entire permit. It goes to the zoning commission for review of the area. then everything else goes to the Board of Supervisors. So it's like saying that they create the overlay and they make it an allowed use. Once it's an overlay, then the supervisors decide it. But there could be the possibility that we put the C in there. So if you're flipping the district, you put the C in there, and that's where I talked about the double layer process where you maximize the engagement with the public as far as the conditional use, the rezone that goes through the zoning commission to the supervisors. And then the deciding of the nuts and bolts of the permit involve all the parties as far as the zoning commission, board of adjustment for looking at the site plans and the placement and everything, but ensuring that they acquire their approval through the supervisors for all the accessory based permits, having a decommissioning plan, having all those things that they directly sign in an agreement with the county would be a very key part of the process, is keeping basically those bodies involved. So I guess at this point, I'll defer back to the board, and I would probably suggest going through this ordinance language, starting back page 14, or excuse me. Yeah, kind of going into page packet page 10, page 8 there, and kind of looking at that concept by concept, see how the commission feels. And so I do think it would be important to kind of establish, again, information overload, but a possible direction that the commission might be interested in. Because if we get kind of an indication of some type of direction, of course, we can go back and try to make that direction happen as far as scrutinizing different areas and working towards some type of ordinance language that could be reasonable.
So the first thing I heard is that we have three different commissions and two different commissions and the supervisors involved in the process. And I like that because the public opportunity to participate. I think
I agree with that.
that's the key with me. The other thing is overlay district. Is it permanent or is it not? Because we're talking about rezoning, and we talk about rezoning being permanent, not spot zoning. One thing that I know that we talked about before is that we like the idea that with a conditional use permit, once that application is no longer functioning, it reverts back to the ag land, for example. So I like that, but I don't know if we can have both. So a little bit more information on the permanency of the overlay district.
Yeah, it depends on how that's written. The overlay district's goal is to allow a new use, but to retain the base use. It's sort of, it means retain all the rights and privileges of agricultural preservation, but allow an overlay to sit there with some additional allowance, but restrictions. Based on how the district is written and how the ordinance is written, like you said, the conditional use, depending on the decommissioning or the end of life of the project, depending on, you could do a percentage on how many panels go out of commission, on whether somebody comes back for reauthorization. In other words, so much percentage, or you could have it written in there in a way, so much percentage of the park goes away or something happens. You can make them come back to the county for reauthorization or re-permitting, depending on the level of damage. So we could kind of look at the balance there on what would reconstitute reauthorization of it. Or if it sunsets and goes away, you're left with agricultural preservation. So the overlay could be directly tied to that project, very similar to the conditional use. And I think what we have to explore is how the conditional use can be used directly with, together, both permits. How can they both be used as far as coming to the commission, giving us all a full scale scope of the entire project, where the applicant has to be transparent with all of us, the public as a whole, what the footprint of the project is, so that we know up front. And so when you debate it at the commission level, as far as whatever criteria we come up with to be used as the rezone, whether it's CSR or slope or other specific requirements, that it's transparent. So as the debate goes through the commission to the supervisors, and then it goes back through the conditional use and involves the Board of Adjustment, so that it's hopefully a turnkey application as far as having laid out requirements so that we can convey that information to the neighbors, to the public as much as possible. And so I hope that kind of helps as far as the duality of both of those.
Would there be any problem in the county as if you did go with the structure of an overlay district and then a conditional use within that process? That if there were another overlay district created elsewhere in the county, would there be any problem with those being treated differently based on the location and the response from the surrounding property owners?
It depends on the conditions. If we leave language and room in there, that's at least, we want to be enumerated so everybody knows up front kind of what the standards are, but you want to have at least some room in there for a condition that something is brought to your attention that would likely need to be conditioned. Something like that could be a possibility, but I think the ultimate goal would be to be consistent and to be clear so that the applicant can see. We want to have this laid out enough where the applicant knows what they're getting themselves into, or they don't want to spend all that money and invest in a project and all of a sudden they're dealing with the realm of uncertainty. So we kind of got to look at the balance of that. And so involving a conditional use, there is a balance to that. But to me, we've got to try to exhaust as many options as possible on the potential. We have all different kinds of land out there. We have elevate, and I think that's why slope came into this. I think that's why CSR has been a part of this, is the uniqueness of this county. There's unique farm grounds, there's unique hill grounds, there's locations. I think when we look at separation distances requirements, to me, this is going to come to that debate as well, which we saw in wind. What are the appropriate locations that need to be protected or not so much need to be protected across the state? There's some ordinances in there that will put some separation distances in. There's some that are real friendly to neighboring property lines, or they offer setback waivers. And so in some of this prototype draft, anything that's in red in there, and this stuff here is not by any means a proposal. It's just to show you some possible options, but setbacks can have waivers or a relationship if folks feel that the neighbors have a positive opinion where they would be willing to sign off on a waiver of some sort closer to the property line. That could be dealt with. Much of the best practices material talks about different levels of how far away you are from an occupied residence. So there's number of opinion out there. And I think that when we eventually have more public hearings about this, that's one thing I'd love to hear from the residents is, because to me, when you're debating a clear number, you kind of get clear answers from the public as far as how far away they want these to be from certain areas. What are the protected areas, right of way, drainage districts, conservation areas? Again, we can protect from the city limits, airports, and all the kind of obvious places that may require protecting. The other element that we have is we have significant floodplain in Woodbury County too. We have various soil types. Again, slope has been brought into this. There's been concerns generally about just the fact that slope has been brought into the debate on erosion and those type of things that folks are going to want to receive clarity and confidence that these items are put in a safe way. And so may want to consider the floodplain. Some counties do not allow them in the floodplain. There's other counties that require that you follow the specific floodplain requirements of elevating the assets above the base flood elevation level, which would be anything electrical and of value would have to be higher than that base flood. So anytime you're dealing with floodplain, you got to really look at the consequences of the neighborhoods, neighbors, and those safety considerations there. So that would be a part of the ordinance as well. When I read through some of these concepts, for example, starting on packet page 13, and we go down the line, I know many of you have experiences in putting conditions on. You see things here that are quite obvious. Screening has been used as a conditional use permit criteria. We need to be concerned about glare, compliance. I know the Board of Adjustment very frequently puts a condition on that they comply with all state, federal regulations. Packet page 15. Accessory structures, fencing requirements, panel height, the specific submittal requirements. So what we're looking for if we do an ordinance change is a very clear process on what happens when somebody applies. The application goes to staff. What are the expectations of staff as far as engaging with all the appropriate stakeholders and running it by the appropriate departments? Packet page 15, we kind of talked about, we've got Woodbury County Conservation, we've got secondary roads, we have emergency management, we have emergency services. Those are definitely important stakeholders out there across the county that we all seek their input all the time on many cases. So they should likely be part of that consideration process. That prong number 4 on packet 16, number 14 talks about conditional use permit would be presented to the county zoning commission for review, Board of Adjustment for the public hearing, and the decision on the conditional use. And so I know it sounds confusing, but there's an attempt here to have an ordinance that can be portable to various needs. So for example, let's just say some form of this ordinance looks good, but let's just say the county decides that it's general industrial is where we put these, which is what it is now. Well, we end up here with a conditional use permit ordinance here. And so we say general industrial. So if we're in general industrial, the ordinance already allows for that. The development plan already allows for that. So there's a clear path that you would take this to the zoning commission for the conditional use. You take it to the Board of Adjustment for the approval, but you have all those agreements in there that they have to achieve. So they have to go back and get all that stuff taken care of through the Board of Supervisors. So we're trying to make it fit that way. The other way to make it fit now is if you introduce the overlay district, you have this in here as well. You have to go get the overlay district authorized by the supervisors and you all through going through the conditional, or excuse me, the rezone process. So you go through that process, but then you go back to here, and this is your conditional use permit process for deciding that CUP permit. So it's sort of like, is this area appropriate? Is this area not appropriate? So this debate comes down to what are those appropriate areas? And so having one of those considerations be an ordinance that complements an existing process, I think that's square one where we can start and look at how do we complement the existing conditional use permit process with these added features that involve the Board of Supervisors, just in the realm of the conditional use. The request for areas outside in the county, I think it's important to look at the demand from the public on where these areas can come from. So that's looking at the development plan again, and the consideration number one. If the overlay district ends up being a possible option here because of the customization of the area, again, it comes down to how do we write the overlay rezone? And I think kind of mentioning what Chris had brought up originally is the relationship between the two and the factor of how you get there. How can that use be instituted and authorized? And so trying not to confuse everybody as far as we're used to the C being the custom area, and you're all well versed in that. You do it all the time on a number of issues, but because the C is not allowed on ag land, and the previous recommendation was to put the C there, and so that's not part of the factor now. But an overlay district is very similar to having the C, but it brings the supervisors in. Is kind of, I think, kind of the nutshell answer to that. It brings them in, makes them a permitting entity on that respective area. So really, it kind of comes down to, do you just keep the current process as is? Do you have an added feature ordinance, which would be similar to this one? Or do you add the overlay district? If you add the overlay district, it's imperative we have the debate on what is the threshold to get that overlay district. Scott relies on the CSR. Lynn uses a rubric. So I think that's ultimately when we get into the nuts and bolts of this, we've got to talk about those concepts. Any questions specific to content or?
Feel for what sounds good?
Guess the concern I would have is with option 5, do nothing, remain the way it is. We may end up with a situation where the supervisors may choose to go with a standalone ordinance with solar, like wind. Then that gets it to just one commission. But well, supervisors are the only group that have to review it then.
Body,
So,
one body, one meeting.
right.
Okay.
And I guess I like the fact that there's more opportunity for people to voice their concerns with a different process.
Get different opinions from larger set of body.
If I may add to what Tom had said, the standalone ordinance does not consider zoning districts. Like the wind one does not involve zoning. And so the debate on wind has been setbacks countywide. And so when it's rooted in the zoning ordinance, you get to debate which areas of the county by zoning district. When you look at the development plan, which is really the document that starts the whole basis of the ordinance, you debate the mapping on that plan. What are those areas? If the public decided, hey, we're fine, with painting, this area of Woodbury County, maybe we learn some new characteristics where the county wants to grow by 2040 for greater industrial beyond this issue, industrial growth as a whole. Are there other areas in the county that the public would want to discuss? We all know that, and out of respect for folks that, they own their land, they have their areas, and then, you paint a different level of use out there. It gets confusing. You retain your existing rights. We know there's farm ground now down in the industrial areas that retain much of those uses, but the development plan in the long run says, what kind of county do we want to be over the long run? And it's the consequence of that plan is huge, because that's what we hang our hats on when we make policy. And I think we got to really reference that a lot because that's a long-term look that allows decision makers to decide whether something is appropriate or not. Our development plan currently does enable this debate. Our development plan enables us permitting solar. It enables us permitting wind. But the debate really is about what areas are appropriate or not. I think that if we remember that, it kind of helps us as far as the positioning and the writing of this ordinance. To reflect on what Tom had said, Commissioner Bride, a recommendation that comes out of this body, there's always those possibilities where, maybe a standalone could be a possibility, or, maybe if we do it this way, or you present a recommendation that offers a reasonable review and includes multiple bodies and gives a public access. I think we all hope to find that golden mean, or that middle ground, or that aspect to find something that is balanced with what the public has in mind, because the public and the demand of the public ultimately is where public policy comes from and should come from through the development planning process. And so I tried to lay out these possibilities as just kind of a map to go forward. The supervisors have too, but you have your rights as far as the commission to look at the recommendation from various angles, exhaust angles. We're in harvest, of course, and so we're not pressured to rush to a recommendation, have it tomorrow. So it's a thoughtful, thorough analysis, and hopefully we can continue to hear from the public. I hope when we get to our public hearing and people wish to speak on the issue, I know we typically give 3 minutes, and I know many here have went to Board of Supervisor meetings, and you get the 3 minutes, and sometimes the public will ask the supervisors and even your commission to receive materials. If folks comment on this, we're always happy to receive materials. And so I would always recommend offering remarks and offering supplemental information in so that we all can learn from what the public has to offer. But I guess I would probably recommend, if you have questions of me directly about what we find in here.
The downside to having an overlay district. Yes.
It depends on what you allow with the overlay district. I think Scott County, them relying on CSR directly, was their way of recognizing that protection of the ag land. I don't know. They have told me they haven't received a direct rezone, I don't believe, under that CSR criteria. But CSR, as we've discussed, and I know the public has shared with us, there's concerns too about the CSR. I know Chris had touched on that too, where Lynn County responded to that. And so solely hanging the hat on CSR could be done. It has been done, but it may add quite a bit of limitation to a landowner's ability to achieve that district, which could be a tough thing. So looking for the balance to.
In that same point, at a previous meeting, there was discussion from the public how unreliable some of those CSI numbers were, or inconsistent, I should say. I really like that Lynn rubric in the fact that all of the point system were positive points except for CSR. Once your CSR started going up, then they got docked for that, which helps,
Yeah.
keep that in perspective.
Nice to know what the point scale, I mean, there's no legend as far as what the point scale.
How much they have to achieve.
What, I mean, what, yeah,
Yeah.
you get a point scale and it's.
I wasn't able to find that in there, what they had to, what was the cutoff number?
I've talked to a number of people about that. They, for some reason, they did not make it very clear on their material that it's a 100-point scale. So you got to get to the 100 is my understanding. So if run the characteristics of the farm ground or the respected area that you're trying to go for the overlay, it's almost like a scavenger hunt that they set up there as far as doing agricultural mitigation and doing different species of planting native grasses into an area to get points. So they set that up as kind of a mechanism to do all these positive things as a balance. And so this is very new. They had recently passed it, so it hasn't been field tested, which would definitely be a concern. CSR has been much more on its own, field tested even in this county as far as the typical rezone. But by Lynn just freshly doing this, we don't have a whole, host of information that we can look at.
I really liked that. And then in the same thought, I thought to myself, who is monitoring and checking all of that stuff? Planted number of species, like who's out checking to make sure there's the same number of, I mean, that seemed overwhelming. It looked like good, but who's policing that?
Well, that's what happens when you do public policy and you come up with an idea. That's usually the pathway to additional bureaucracy or additional levels of government. And so the more that you put in there for regulation might have to require additional resources to enforce these things. So we always have to be careful as far as what we decide to institute in there, because then that becomes a policy in itself to say, hey, we need somebody for agricultural species analysis and things like that. And so that's a interesting point.
Good point, actually.
In that same thought, read through what our supervisors said, talk about no more than 2% of the ag land. I wonder to myself, how do they arrive at 2%? What's so magical about 2%? And I remember in a previous public meeting when Leo gave the numbers of how many acres of solar panels would equal a power plant. I can't remember too fast. I couldn't write it all down, but is that enough or is that too much land? And 2% doesn't seem like that much, but what if it's twice as much as that is needed? What if it's half as much as is needed to actually make a productive? I would like to see some.
Well, the papers,
Someone needs to do all that math
I
for
mean,
me to tell me.
I mean, I guess it's 6 acres, yeah, 8,000 acres. Gigawatts.
And what does that equal to a power plant?
I
Does that make
thought
sense?
Leo's comment was it was a 2,500 acre
He said it
would
was enough or something.
equate to
6 and 8 acres.
right, but he's looking for the answer to what Port Neal, what one plant,
Yeah.
the north and south together.
There's Mid-America.
Mid-America,
Okay.
right there.
I mean, roughly speaking, between unit 3 and unit 4, you're looking probably around 800 megawatts, 700 megawatts, something there. That's 2 units. We have 4 units there, 2 higher, 3 and 4.
But so right now, the total output would be capable, and then did you do the math on how many acres?
800 megawatts, I mean, times 6, I mean, you need 5,000 acres to roughly to
To approach what is being produced right now by both
So
plants.
2%.
2%'s around 8,400 acres. So you'd be above what
Yeah.
that production is currently total
Right.
right now.
Yeah, and so I just know from past stuff, when you put an exact number in there, like 2%, what if the solar now becomes so much better and they need fewer? Now the 2% is way overkill instead of having a 2% in there.
And I think they're just looking for a cap, to just say it can't be over this, which, there again, I think I asked you, what was the largest one currently operating in Iowa is 800 acres.
I mean, yeah, so our Holiday Creek project is roughly about 800 acres. There's a larger solar farm over on Apollo. It's bigger than.
The likelihood, that's what I'm trying to get at. And I think
I
you're
understand
asking
that.
what the likelihood is gonna be.
They made a point to say agricultural preserve, and we need to preserve. Well, they're preserving too much by putting in 2%, and that's why I just don't like the percentage number. And I know that's a cap, but it might allow too much in there that, I don't know if that makes any sense.
Was it the wind turbines, was it like 4 to 6 megawatts if they're 100% efficient? Is that something like
Yeah,
that?
wind turbines range on a nameplate generation. I mean, the newest ones we're installing are upwards of 4 to 5 megawatts capacity. You gotta remember those capacity factor tied to that. The
I know it's
wind-
20 or 30% efficient or something like that.
Wind turbines in this part of the state are about 40, 45, solar panels about 25 to 30%, roughly speaking, on an annual basis.
40% for wind and 25 for solar.
On the lower ends, yeah.
We had a question for you regarding currently in the industrial area. If solar was in that area, what's the setback? Do any of the allowed uses in industrial expand beyond the boundaries of the property owner?
As of right now,
You get any of the allowed uses currently, do any of those setbacks expand beyond the property lines?
believe.
I don't think,
Yeah,
I don't think they do. And then that's where I would have a concern even there with solar. If it were 1,000-foot setback, I'm assuming occupied would mean an office building.
Yeah.
So then they would be going beyond their own property line. And, if it's 1,000 feet on a 40-acre parcel, that's 30 acres that they could take away the use of a surrounding property owner in the industrial area. And I don't think a lot of guys would be happy if they find out, 3/4 of the quarter section is no longer able to be used for anything. So that's a concern I had, was the property line should maybe be the determining.
the unit, okay. That's different for the zoning ordinance now. The zoning ordinance right now, if we were to get a permit, falls under the zoning district dimensional standards of the existing district. So we're not factoring in, I don't believe anywhere where we're telling somebody you have to be from an occupied residence. The only other area that shows up in is the wind ordinance standalone. So yeah, to answer that, we don't take a specific protected area and enumerate in there right now, what distance you have to be.
I
But
just want to make, don't accidentally do that and then create a,
As a residence, it's established.
no, that's what I'm saying. You shouldn't encroach upon somebody else's property with any of these setbacks and limit their ability to do what they currently can.
If somebody's ag estates is on the corner of a section, and then you move the setbacks and somebody can put solar panels up to the edge of the section, that's probably appropriate for the person that's on just. Only if you want to build a new residence there, and it's already, and the solar panel's already there, I mean, that's a different situation.
But even there, that would cause a problem if you've got ground that doesn't have if it's residential, let's just use that. And that setback expands onto your property as they build on the property line, and now this, even though there was no homes there, that means you no longer can build homes there. Or
Unless you waive the,
can,
unless you waive the setback, I mean.
if they waive, they can still build.
If you have a waiver mechanism in there that addresses that, it'd have to force a conversation.
And that's kind of where the conditional use too, when we review that and you look at it, that, well, wait a minute, you've got ground in here that maybe was subdivided 30 years ago that is ripe for development, but they haven't done anything. So,
Those are good points. I mean, we've got to keep in mind the law of unintended consequences. You've got to look at the setbacks, the scenarios there. Got to be careful with the if you do any from the cities, because there's cities that sit close to industrial areas too. So there's always ramifications. To do one thing. So got to keep in mind each zoning district, each potential location. I think it would be helpful to know more about where these potential areas are, because we're kind of working in the dark in a lot of respects as far as we're talking hypothetically on where you can put something, but really ultimately till you get an application is where you're scrutinized whether it fits with an area, and I think that's why we're information overload, is because we're trying to really understand how this is going to fit. There's areas that might fit perfect, but there's areas that just may not work at all. But how do we come to that appropriate balance? So everything that we look at, we got to look at the other side of it too, unintended.
The slope stuff, that, right? Really only for, you could be on a higher slope also with movable panels and still benefit. One thing on slopes, obviously down a rabbit hole a little bit. Obviously plenty of land that's farmed that's on steeper than 5% slope right now. And having permanent vegetation may be better than having some current tillage practices also that exist.
that was kind of on Chris's comment, the 5% slope, that's a foot, 20 foot. I don't think I have any ground that's even close to that. More about where they're done that maybe would erosion even 10% slope, or whatever. I'm not saying to do that. It's something that needs to be, instead of putting that number in there, that's supervisors, did they come up with these numbers from a different plan, or did they just?
Well, they prepared that as a direction, I should say, as far as create the conversation. They want us to engage it.
So they really didn't backing of what these numbers came.
That's what I was trying to say. Throwing out 2%. I mean, how are you arriving at? You choose. That's
the first number that came up.
I don't know.
Somebody else did it. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about different counties that are already approaching this and have passed this. So it's good to kind of look at their language and their information rather than trying to recreate the wheel ourselves. Will it work? Do we want it to work?
Other thing, I mean, with the percent agriculture and then trying to crop amongst it and stuff, I mean, it doesn't, bad thing is then you have to expand your footprint and build more acres to get the same effect. And instead of, if we're going to pursue it, and it's the right technology, I mean, then it's better to consolidate and only acres versus 10,000 acres, so you can double crop it and use.
That's farming in between.
Yeah, I think that's top honor hay in between them.
Well, either that or it's not, wasn't clear how to do that. Was it was 1%?
So sorry.
Okay, yeah.
use
To
of
me,
the
that
parcel.
wouldn't really make much sense either, because if you take 51%, okay, it stays farm ground, you still have the exact same setup on the other
49%.
49%
With the setback.
that you don't want.
Okay,
because
but-
you're- You know, I mean, there's,
Exactly.
like you said, if you expand to 10,000 acres, then you just took up more ground. Instead of keeping this part here all farm ground and, right, just like urban sprawl, it's better to condense it
To me, it
tightly
seems like
around
it
the
should,
city.
I know, say the part of the area we we're talking about, down in the flat area. Side of Moss Hill. It seems to me like it'd be appropriate for most places in the county. If it's appropriate. You look at population density, it's a lot higher. Closer to the city and stuff too, as far as acreages and stuff like that, trying to minimize your impact. Or maybe Louisville wants to have something near there, I mean, and that may not be the wrong thing either,
It's something I think, we think about too, is the expansion of a small town within the county. And are they interested in something like this to supplement their power? And then, will they annex? Will, be able to accommodate their needs too?
That was one of the comments about community solar. I mean, this overlay district would allow, say it's Mobile. They could create an overlay district on the north edge of Mobile, not rezone that property to industrial, but still allow for a condensed. And that's where a situation would be where you might not want to have half of it ag, because you might want to put it right tight next to the city limits and not take up any more ground than you have to. So that's where percentage rule might hurt you.
Yeah, and yeah, the 5149 is kind of speaking to the preserving the agriculture, the aspects of that area out there. And that's kind of associated with the hope for agrivoltaics or the agri-solar concept, which it's early on that. There's a lot of scenarios there where it's under study. It would have to be perfected in a lot of respects, and I think it's quite early to establish that as a direct policy. But it's important to be open to it as far as a farmer being able to adjust or have it coincide with agriculture. So I think that's kind of where that grew out of there, is kind of twofold: to allow the farmer to have some opportunity to be engaged in utility solar, but at the same time, keep that agriculture protected in some respects. You can talk about, animal grazing or other forms of agriculture that they could be compatible with.
Same sentence, education from 500 feet to a mile.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
To maximize the public's knowledge and involvement, engagement, so that they're aware. We do that for the cell tower now. When the tower that recently was approved, zoning committee, the people were notified via letter for 1 mile within that region.
Are there other examples besides cell towers?
Just cell towers right now.
Is that
Yeah, on the other ordinance, yeah.
I agree. The more people you get involved in.
It's different than a subdivision going.
Right.
It's not. They changed the landscape you're driving by, so it'd be appropriate to these.
So is it typical, I'm just curious for background information, is it typical that these contracts are 20 years?
10 years plus extensions, or
This is one of those fields where technology, it's got to be changing so fast.
Yes. Why, I mean, there was discussion at an earlier point in time about where you set the next height for the panels. There's, you've seen it on the wind turbine side, we're already seeing it on the solar side, where people are just fit more megawatts, more capacity into each panel, the piles, the assemblies, are able to hold more weights over time. So you can really kind of maximize your efficiency. It's kind of the main driver behind that. How can you maximize efficiency with the same footprint actually? And so accommodating for that technological advancement. Potentially better.
Dual crop or graze
I
or,
think Dan kind of hit that nail on the head. I mean, we are looking at grazing, I will say that. Dual crop very early on. ISU just partnered with Alliance on their campus to look at that exactly, the agrivoltaic version of it, to see what kinds of producing crops work best around solar panels, but it's not something that's really matured yet. But from like a grazing standpoint, we are pursuing that. We are looking at that potentially for one of our solar sites throughout the state. The only problem is right now, for mission 2022 or later, so we don't have the vegetative growth yet that sustaining grazing without killing off a lot of the there. So there are two things that establish those experiments.
so it would take maybe 1 or 2 years to be able to graze a new site because of
Depends on the
establishment.
vegetation. So like we have buffalo grass down at the Neal site. That one, our O&M team, they're estimating to be able to be grazed on. We have a pollinator mix over by Fort Dodge that they're estimating. I don't even know if they're going to be grazing on that. I'm not entirely sure, but that one, they're estimating 3 to 5 years for vegetation to kind of set in. There's a lot of mowing that has to take place. It can be sprayed with your pollinator mixes. They're all susceptible to the pesticides and herbicides that they'll eat anyway. So it just takes those types of sites.
What about the risk of physical damage to the panels? How concerned or how do you address that?
For animals, really all we're really looking at is sheep. I mean, from the cattle side of things, they like to rub, they like to itch and scratch on things. They do a lot of damage to the piles that the arrays set on. And then for goats, I mean, they like to climb and eat everything. So we don't want goats, stomping on our solar arrays at the end of the day. So people are about the only option we're looking at this is that kind of people use or supplement use, I should say.
And what about as far as decommissioning? How can the land be put back where it was if one were to be decommissioned? I know wind turbines are pretty difficult, but you can still leave some of the concrete in the ground.
Right.
It seems you look
Based
the
on what
land
we've
back
been
where it
told
was.
from our engineering consultants and our operations team, it will be a bit easier than the wind turbines, just because you're not dealing with the concrete footings. These are just piles that are driven into the ground, so you can easily take them out of the ground. And then you just have your surface restoration. Disassemble your arrays, take the pilings out, take your cable out. Or, based on the decommissioning. You look at a lot of utilities, which is different, obviously, in agricultural areas than in urban areas, but a lot of utilities in urban areas just kind of, they'll decommission in place for like their underground natural gas pipelines, conduits, for electrical lines, stuff like that. Not really sure how transmission gas pipelines decommission over cross-country pathways, across farmland, but it would be a simple enough process. It's comparatively to wind.
right. So theoretically, you could leave with nothing left there and store the soil.
more easily than other generating resources, yes.
So the Port Neal array on footings? They aren't.
There's pilings
Okay.
that are driven into the ground. I think that's the same for their entire solar each currently. That's true. Got something there. I'm not 100% sure of that. I think our Colorado Creek one, 8 foot.
Okay, so not horrible then.
Yeah, and then they sit above the surface about 4 feet or so. Don't quote me on that. I think they're right around that 8-foot range.
What's that?
Water.
In some places, yeah.
At least theoretically, 8 foot can come out of the ground. If it's 50 foot or something, a core piling, it's gonna stay.
Can you bury, power lines, I mean, on the sites you have with the, are they buried or are they above ground on?
The ones that Neil are buried, they run back to the inverters, then run underground to the interconnection. The ones we have at Holiday Creek, like Fort Knox, those ones are above ground. They run along the tracking system. It's got like a gear shaft that kind of so they run along those.
In a floodplain, can the lines be buried or they have to be above ground or just the inverter units or storage units have to
Control
be
panels
underground?
mainly, isn't it?
Any electrical asset and panels, everything has to be either anchored and higher than the base flood by a foot for sure.
But the line itself can be buried.
Well, I'd have to check on that aspect of it.
That must be a typical process, so for you to bury the lines, because you're in floodplain on the Port Neal array. Okay,
I think you're right. It's probably the lines can be, have to be buried, but anything sensitive.
Yeah.
Has
be above.
above.
Okay. How much power gets lost between the arrays and where it goes?
Yeah, you're gonna have efficiencies anytime you're transferring energy, whether it's thermal energy out of coal or natural gas speeds. You're gonna have the same thing, transfer thermal, which is solar.
And that's all calculated in like a solar farm or
Yeah,
a utility
It's a
scale
4 megawatt park and it produces 4 megawatts on
site.
days.
Okay.
What's the driving factor on the location? Is it the existing transmission lines? Currently,
That's a-
proximity?
It's a large factor. So there are projects, a distribution project, so it connects into our distribution power lines down by Fort Neal. Our Holiday Creek project is a transmission level project, so that connects into the transmission line that run across the agricultural. You have to go through a study process with the grid operator. There's an independent grid operator, even though we own transmission facilities, it's operated by an independent third party to ensure that there's free market basically in the transmission system. The study process that you go through basically tells you whether or not there is excess capacity on the transmission system at that geographic point. If there's not, you're on the hook for paying the upgrade costs associated with where the failures would be throughout that transmission system at your project. So its consideration is in relation to a transmission facility, the current state of the transmission facility, and then you also have, a large consideration is also policy as well. Level.
Anything you see in here that you like? I think we've discussed quite a few of them. Any of the things that you don't like? Maybe that's easier.
We discussed the supervisor recommended, discussion point about light industrial expansion. So that's a permanent.
Yeah, they make the reference to that. That would kind of fall more under consideration one on whether you retool the development plan or the future land use map to paint areas of the county for the industrial district. So that would be a different, if you did not want to use the overlay district at all and just straight did a conditional use, added features, edited the development plan, and put the areas of the county which you would want to be limited industrial, then put the conditional use opportunity in the limited industrial category. And then if you're following this ordinance, have the supervisors involved with the agreements, but do zoning commission board of adjustment as far as the permitting entity. So that limited industrial was brought up as an opportunity to not do the overlay district, but do this through the development plan and retool that map. So it's really much more about retooling the map, which is something that we could do because we're in the middle of that.
Like a conditional use with set up number of bullet points have to be hit to make it qualify would be and make it an acceptable use for area around the volume, so it's 2% or whatever would be.
Be more flexible.
Yeah, so you're not stuck in just being down by Salix or by Mobile, you know, but appropriate areas, you know, maybe avoiding some of the conservation areas, but allowing some decisions, but having parameters around whether it's a score sheet or whether it's some of the other things we talked about here, you know, setbacks, things like that. That would be, if you fit the bill and check the boxes, I mean, then it might be appropriate to do.
In response to your question about consideration number one, because it's such a new thing and we're still kind of exploring and learning, I'd rather not do the map, do any changes to the map at this point in time, because we do have other systems that work just as well and probably even better than a broad
Rezoning.
brush. Yeah. I like the conditional use. I personally like the overlay idea because it gets all the entities involved multiple times. That's my personal opinion. So I think, do we all feel like we can check off consideration one?
I don't know that you're gonna be able to accurately paint that area that you need to paint.
Yeah,
That's the problem.
that's part of the problem. I don't think you want to.
10 years from now, we might not
I
know.
think, I mean, it just seems like the overlay would be an opportunity to use in the AP areas, is what it would be, not
More flexibility you involved.
maybe easier to tie into a transmission line by Hampton than it is somewhere else. Maybe that's the right place to be. You know, and
I was looking for the difference between the overlay and just.
The overlay is something that can go anywhere in the county and be rezoned to the overlay district.
Temporarily.
Yeah, right, it's for the purpose of the solar that's going in. And then with the conditions that are drawn up or established, but it gives the ability to be flexible to, maybe it is the town of Mobile that comes forward that says, you know, hey, we need 10 acres here. We don't want it industrial, but we want to just be able to use it for this purpose. And then that also would be something that would have to come before the zoning commission, the supervisors, and if through conditional use, the board of adjustment, so you'd have all three groups would have to review it. Instead of just one if it's a standalone, it's the supervisors and correct or?
Yeah, and if I may add that the overlay district, you would creating the opportunity for one. The supervisors ultimately create them on an application by application basis, if that makes sense. You're creating the opportunity for them. Right now, all of our zoning districts are out there now. We know where they're at, we can identify them, but an overlay is created by virtue of the application process on the footprint or the legal description in terms of where it's requested. So once that's approved, that's the district. Another tool that could be used with overlay, you could enumerate a cap on the overlay too. You could give out, let's just say 8,000 acres or 10,000 acres, put a cap on that in the ordinance and say that the supervisors themselves can't create any more than that unless they go back and amend that. So you can put added protections on there. When I say anything we enumerate into the ordinance becomes an added protection, because in order to change an ordinance, guess what you got to do? You got to go back through the process again. And so if somebody ever said, okay, we've elapsed 10,000 acres, we want to make the request to the public, you'd have to have a high level debate again in the public on whether you increase caps or not. So an acre cap could be part of an overlay too. There's again several issues or several tools that you can use to control the overlay district, density issues, etc. I know that there's some ordinances that do an acre cap. I've seen one of those ordinances, I think a proposed draft where they even put megawatts as a cap. I think that was Tama County.
I think some of the caps I saw as far as land acres used, the lowest one that was actually identified was 400 acres. I mean, to me, that's like testing the water type acreage to see how this is going to work out. And then the nice thing is that we do have to, sometimes we might have to review all of this, decide what's working and what isn't
It doesn't
working.
even be a free for all.
Right,
It's also make it more restrictive that you have to revisit it every 6
right
months
away,
either.
right, right.
6 months.
So it sounds like we're kind of leaning towards the consideration 3. And it looks like the only difference between that and consideration 4 is the 51%, which I think we decided was too restrictive. Is that right?
Well, it depends too, as far as, I know that one was rooted into the ag use. I still think that ag use could be part of any future discussion. But as far as the agrivoltaic district, I haven't identified another jurisdiction that has done that. I just kind of put that out there as a potential discussion point or a topic as far as trying to marry the ag use concept as well. But the ag, we got to keep monitoring. It's a changing industry, a growing industry, and that's one thing we got to stay engaged on to see for sure.
So the agri-solar somehow married into consideration 3 somehow.
Yeah,
By definition, if nothing else.
somehow, some way. And another thing that I haven't really touched on enough is
It wouldn't be restrictive. It's written the way it is, it wouldn't be restrictive from doing agrivoltaic.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just another
just that you're-
definition.
It's just that your capacity would be decreased potentially on what you can, how much energy you can generate.
Which we can
Theory
do
behind-
based by
if it's a- if
criteria
it's a-
anyway.
if the pool of acres is 8,000 acres or 6,000 acres. We have less penetration, solar panels in that same area. I mean, then
The theory behind that on 4 agri-solar is a picture in your head of 2 swaths of combine runs down between the panels, things like that.
Yeah.
Crazy.
The pictures that we showed last meeting.
Because there's a movement, Center of Rural Affairs, other places post information out there to the public, as far as educating the public, introducing the public to, the coexistence, how this can coexist with agriculture out there. Other issues we may have to discuss or integrate into this debate. If you look at Lynn County, they're dealing with batteries too, battery systems. So batteries should very likely be part of this debate as well. If you're going to be talking about renewables across the board, whether it's wind, whether it's about the solar and the battery collection, because we'll probably get requests to have battery facilities too.
Rather than transmission lines, we'll have transmission to a battery collection system, to or transmission
As long
lines.
as you have the transmission line, that's not effective.
So there's a lot of developers that are seriously looking at implementing battery storage with solar specifically. Not something we've done.
You use the power that you're getting and then you adjust with coal fire plant.
Correct.
You just reduce or increase there. You don't need to store power.
At this point in time, we don't see a benefit for it. I mean, it is still fairly costly. Well, in a rate regulated utility, we don't see value for our customer for battery storage. Say that in the MISO queue, that people have to put their positions into, you have to specify what the generating source is, and there's a large growing number of full use hybrid generators such as solar and battery or wind and battery. It's not something we've done yet, but there's a lot of people seriously contemplating. Lynn County is one. With Nexera, they are looking at doing a solar battery project.
But as of yet, it hasn't been done. But as of yet, it hasn't been done.
I think it's been done, not by us. I mean, Mid-American hasn't done it. We did have a pilot project that was installed 4 years ago. It wasn't connected to any specific generating source at the time. It was exactly that, just a pilot project to see how it works and operated. We haven't continued on that path. There's some sites in Iowa that do have batteries incorporated with the generation side of it.
You could have that in your bullet points for whether it is or isn't, then address those differently and still be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think the REC, sorry to interrupt, but I think the REC, it's the REC, I think they have battery storage out by Austin. Drive past that substation, you'll see a couple
That's
dozen
the
Tesla packs.
Tesla things, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not co-located with generation, but it's a form of energy storage. Substation, because substations are built in areas that, you know, if they're in floodplain areas, they have to be brought out of those floodplain requirements. It makes sense for them, obviously, to put battery at that substation location.
So is it fair to say that consideration 5 is off the table? No changes?
Exactly. Which one's off the table?
5? Changes. Talking about changes this whole night, so.
I just think if that recommendation to do nothing, they'll want to do something.
we'll
I
take it
don't
out
know.
of the zoning. Communicate on various levels.
That you can make.
Whatever they want, we can.
Yeah, I think, but not doing anything is not what they're looking for. That's the only thing I guess I'm concerned with. Yeah, I think our recommendation can be
Judging by
whatever.
that.
But that's the comment I was making, that I think that if we just say do nothing, you're
your commission has the latitude to craft a recommendation, how you see fit as far as explaining it, the rationale behind it. So if you did come to the conclusion that it's not as simple as going and telling the Board of Supervisors you don't want to do anything, it would be a justification of your support of the current process. If you were to do that versus, not do something, it would be the merits behind what the existing process is. If you're to look at other recommendations, you could probably hand them a couple options or maybe a menu of a couple things that might be reasonable. I remember when that wind debate was going on, that right in the middle of that debate, you all would recall that I remember one of the supervisors mentioned something about the Los Hills, and then the proposal kind of got split there. So I guess the point I'm getting at is the commission has every right to have your recommendation comprised of a couple options or more, if that's what you choose, or if you want to have one alone option. But you're free to consider everything that they've tasked, to look at it, and just they would expect a rationale, behind how it would be a suitable pathway, because ultimately this is a recommendation, but it rises up to the major public debate, which they'll engage with up to 3 public hearings. But I'm sure by the time they get to that level, they're hoping that it's well vetted. And that's why we're spending this much time here trying to do the work session tonight, talk about it, then we'll public hearing. Definitely hear from the public on more concepts that I hope are pointed out to us as well as we refine a proposal. But we did need to get to the point of get details for sure.
So I'm looking at consideration number 2 and consideration number 3, packet page 10 and packet page 20. One has purpose intent, that's a utility scale solar energy systems overlay district. And we also have intent. I'm seeing a lot of similar languages. We're incorporating the language, a lot of the language between all of the considerations, right? We're not just saying, okay, the
Yeah.
intent of this is this, but we like this part.
Yeah, the overlay is trying to encompass those multiple things, for sure. The utility solar, the battery systems as referenced, the ag, to try to, give the opportunity so that when it comes up, that there's a menu to consider. Yeah.
But we'll still have intent, we'll have the
Yeah.
conditional use permit, we'll still have the definition.
Yeah, the layout on package
Bella,
9 or page 27 is a very similar layout to the Constitution in our very ordinance. As far as setting the expectation for the overlay, setting up a series of allowed uses. I will point out that many of the ordinances across the state do revert to the controlling zoning district setbacks, where there's some counties that are very comfortable with the setbacks that they have as far as placement of the structures. So if you were to say 20 feet off the property line or from that angle, that's what a lot of the counties have done as far as their controlling setbacks. So our ordinance does that. It mentions we have the area limitations there, the dimensional standards. We have that, grading erosion control in there, which basically is something that developer works with the county as well as the state DNR to get their appropriate DES SWIP plans and assurances that they're gonna protect the project area from runoff or other issues. So that's really how that's written. And then packet page 30, 28 and 29, that sort of is an attempt to rewrite the rezoning process specific to the overlay district. So this here would be kind of the nuts and bolts, especially under procedure, where you could enumerate in there your expectations for flipping to the overlay, whether you rely heavily on CSR, whether you heavily on slope or both, whether you restrict the floodplain and say that you could say no floodplain at all. You could say follow the county floodplain regulations, or other ideas that we have yet to learn that could be used for a criteria or the check boxes on whether an area is appropriate or not. So I would have to say, as far as the consideration of the overlay district, your packet pages 29 to 31 kind of illustrate that. Or if we refine a better set of regulations fit better the weeks ahead, it could be a starting point.
So we do not currently have an overlay for anything else, just the West Hills.
We have an opportunity in there for a conservation overlay, so we have overlay opportunities in there. As far as seeing those executed, I don't think I've witnessed or seen the zone and going through the records where you've all been tasked to create a new conservation area, so. But it is there. Somebody could petition the Board of Supervisors tomorrow if they wanted to try for a conservation district.
Which one's that?
So, for example, on packet page 29 and packet page 32, then the only difference I see in the allowable uses is that we have the majority of the potential systems, and then you have agri-solar, but then over on page 32, you have agri-solar or agrivoltaic utility scale solar system.
That was an attempt to try to one specific for an agricultural centric district.
But then we go on to if you see an I in comparison.
Well.
Nothing has changed.
Very little as far as the overlay.
If we're getting to specific, 10,000 acres is more than the 2% that supervisors mention, which to me is still too much. I prefer 1% as to test the water, so to speak. But I think that will get us beyond the 6-month reevaluation period. But that's, again, that's my thought. The dimensional standards is the same. Grading, sedimentation control appears to be the same. Some supplemental regulations appear to be the same. Process, fair to say, is the same. They're
Yeah.
slightly different.
Technically, it would engage in the series of public hearings, zoning commission level, the Board of Supervisors level, to achieve that, if you're going for the overlay.
Okay, so what I'm seeing though in the procedure part, on page 30 and 33 of the packet, it's that it refers to the 51% on both and a CSR rating of 2, or CSR rating 2. You want us to incorporate? And this one, the one on page 30 says 65, shall not exceed 65.
Seems like that probably, I mean, whether it's between consideration number 2 and consideration number 3, I mean, putting some of those parameters on there for at least just a point of discussion, CSR, but you know, whether that should be a prohibitive thing or not, is probably would be up.
Seems hard to make that prohibitive when it's such an inconsistent number. I don't know much about that, but every time someone talks about it, it seems like it's an inconsistent not super reliable number.
Well, and then it goes back to the majority of,
So-
Where it really means nothing is the CSR is always based on assumption of drainage. And typically where you find that the CSR isn't relative is where they don't have proper drainage.
And how often is it calculated?
You have a CSR 1 and a CSR 2. So
Like-
in the 50, 60 years that they've been doing it, they've done it twice. And it's based off each soil type. And then that soil is relative to the rainfall in the region that it's in. So Monona soil in Woodbury County will not be the same CSR as Monona soil, the same slope in Plymouth County. There will be differences. It's pretty accurate overall, but there are areas that are determinant on certain things that, yeah, it's not very spot on. Well, it took the rainfall. Did they? Okay.
Maybe that, I tried to listen to what you're talking about at these meetings. Didn't seem like you thought it was too consistent.
well, and it goes back to, even our industrial area, which is, has to take into account the slope and the CSRs and everything else. The CSRs in the industrial area are well over 65. Am I right? The CSRs in the industrial area currently are well over 65? Yes, you agree? Okay,
Slope there though.
no slope, definitely no slope, or
That-
very little.
And that's where the development plan map is essential. Because when you paint a different area with map, then you're not talking about rezoning, you're having an area there that's, again, for conditional use consideration. So if you map out a different area, you're not debating CSR on something that's already industrial, because it's the plan of the county
Mhm.
to have that be an area that can have these type of activities there. So we're not debating CSR if we have it good.
They're
with the
just
mapping.
accepting the fact
Yeah.
that that's giving up that ground
Right.
to this
Trying to
purpose.
consolidate it in an area and not.
Right, I get it. I guess my point is that CSR, again, it goes back to the reliability and the location and the slope, and there's so many different factors where it's at. Maybe I'm being confusing.
I just don't think it should be the sole factor.
I don't
Well,
either.
but I think it's probably something worth discussion though.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely, it should
Just
be,
contribute
Yeah,
to
it
the,
should be a
bullet point.
contributing factor, but to put a number on it,
Didn't you say that one county, that was their starting point to qualify?
Yeah,
So I don't.
it's huge. And just the fact that in 2005, we debated it, and kind of looking back, it's meant something to Woodbury County residents as being integrated in as a mechanism to protect farm ground. And so it says, in example, 65 CSR. I mean, it's been a priority for the county to have CSR as part of this discussion. So I think it's imperative to be part of the discussion.
I don't think it would be wrong to spell out that the preference would be lower CSR, lower productive ground. More desirable, but I think it's not a CSR over X is not the exclusion criteria. But having a lower CSR may help provide more support for the project from the various commissions.
I mean, we do that currently with, you generally look at the CR, you don't, it isn't a fixed number, then this is it, that's it. We bring that into the,
the
Decision.
equation, basically. Mhm.
And the key word is consideration. That's in the development plan, that's in the ordinance where you have to consider that. It doesn't put a blanket prohibition on that, but it's part of your rezone considerations. You have to consider it from going from AP to AE too. I mean, we always have that in the report. So, but you're more intense going from AP to industrial. That's a big leap there. I know most of them, since I've been around, has this been our AP to AE rezones for the most part. So we haven't had any major red flags to say don't rezone that based on CSR. So,
So the only line clear then that we're really concerned about is the 51%.
Yeah, I can circle that for future.
Is that kind of what I heard from everyone prior to that?
We
Okay,
can have that in there.
right, take the 51% out.
There's no reason people can't do that if they want to, but I don't think that should be in there myself.
It limits us as far as what they can require and not require. Agree?
Right. I don't think you should force somebody to do that if it hurts as a whole.
You're trying to do it for the better good of the welfare of the community.
Good.
And if you're going to take land out of production, then you should respectfully be as productive as you can on that for doing this. And if you're limited to raising sheep, I guess I have to change my diet, but
Around the city there in Sprawl, if you were to say they all have to be 10-acre lots, you're gonna eat up a lot of. 2-acre lot, you don't take as much farm ground.
You're gonna make it cost prohibitive for the majority of the population.
Right, but the biggest thing
Today.
is you don't wanna expand the area. It has to be so much bigger just to accommodate what may be needed.
Right,
Because then you're losing more ground that you wanna protect.
right.
They had that issue back, their deal with the lots had to contain, N04 got thrown out,
Yeah.
whatever. If the lot didn't contain 50% of the lot with a slope or less than this, you couldn't build on it. And I said, some of the supervisors back then, we got a 10-acre lot, flat. I'm gonna let them build, it's less than 50% of the lot. So now they just gotta go out and get more ground. I said, that doesn't make sense. And they said, well, that's not what we wanted.
Takes a different perspective to point those things
Right,
out.
right.
Yeah,
They just ate up more ground when they were trying to prevent it being eaten.
right.
You remember that?
Okay, so we're good on, what is it, A and D? What about B? Or B for page 30, it says rezone contains soil slope. I don't know, almost 5%.
yeah, that specific for fixed arrays. Is what that's.
Are we only identifying fixed? Are we identifying?
This,
To me, I guess I don't think you should restrict it to 5%. If you have appropriate. It's permanent vegetation, which is better than detailing and.
I mean, that was brought up too with the raise where maybe it would be a step array,
Mhm.
you know, but that ground steeper than 5%. They wouldn't have been able to do it, but they can because,
Haven't limited.
right, so
the slope.
to place that number there, I mean, I understand the purpose, but to place that number there as a fixed number that this is what we have to go by doesn't always make sense overall for the preservation of the soil.
Right.
It depends on what they're doing. I mean,
You'd expect if somebody's gonna, and I don't know what it costs. But what's the cost to put a megawatt of production? What it costs to put the a megawatt in down, support the on-track road?
Probably 2 million-ish.
Per megawatt?
Yeah, wrong numbers right now.
But I'm a rough number guy. So if somebody's gonna invest $100 million in a project, then probably gonna do some research, and put it in somewhere they're gonna.
Suitability wise, as far as
Right.
maximizing its output.
Things facing.
Well,
I'm
That's
just,
why we're
some
here.
of us developer, I would think, before they're going to invest that money, you would think that they, you could be right, but you would think that they would want to be, where they can still benefit from it, to not have to slope the wrong way or whatever.
There's no good place to get that information. You know, you have all sorts, as you cover our state, we have all sorts of farming practices that are just totally different.
Sure.
You know, hills, they're lost. And you go the other way, it's just as bad, if not worse. But it's just, it's so unique that, it's difficult to get information on what to do. I mean, we had the discussion of what, it's, what they want to do. Trying to do it. Oh, I got a meeting together at Pioneer Bank to do it, but unless somebody's willing to do that, they would have built that area, it would have been a disaster.
well, that's what I was gonna say,
There's other
the
ways to do
conditions
this.
in there can allow for proper control of the erosion if you meet these certain hurdles. If you know, if you do this, but you gotta do this. I guess what I'm getting at, there's areas where you could just, if you put 5% there and then they don't have to do anything, you could still have a lot of issues. Versus somewhere else where it maybe is over the 5%, that they did everything right. And that's where the conditions can be drawn out, that this is what's required. Then the impact is gonna be less than maybe 5%.
Developers have it, so excellent. So that type of stuff would be identified, and that would be.
And they do that all the time now. When they do dirt work, they have to, you know, and some contractors are better than others about following that plan, but there is guidelines of what these, you had mentioned vegetation and growth can control a lot of those issues, or plus if you're spending $100
No,
million.
Bella, get in the car
Water.
now. Thank you for walking her. Get in.
Go from a Monona soil to a Napier soil. A Napier soil in our area has 0 clay in it. It will cut like, and it can have a very high CSR. It's a very productive soil, but it will not hold up to something. Just, you know, I can show you all sorts of creeks that are gigantic canyons that you go, well, why is that there? It's not that steep. It's because it's Napier soil. And that Napier soil is sprinkled out.
But that'd be an example of a 5% slope might not even be adequate to prevent erosion.
Right. We're already farming that land anyway. A lot of this stuff's already been farmed anyway, and
Farming helps keep it from
tilling it too, I mean, like the root structure and stuff, right?
but that tillage also helps, the way you do it helps keep it from them. And once you look at a lot of pastures, dry pastures, there's a lot of erosion within our pastures. Just because you put it to permanent grass does not mean that the erosion stops.
I mean, less hills, I mean, it's a perfect example.
Yeah,
So are you saying strike would be B and E? Do we want to put a range? Do we?
Maybe something to the effect of in excess of extra measures or, you know, some, the hurdle has to be a little higher then. But I still think you need the hurdle, even if it's less than 5. You want to prevent erosion no matter what it is. You know, you want to keep area healthy.
Mhm.
And that may mean even a 3% needs to have something done. That's all I guess I would say is the five, just to put a number and say, well, this and above you can't do it, and this and below you can. Then you maybe open the door for other problems.
Right, right. So, yeah.
And there would be, soils prone to erosion, maybe would be a better term instead of 5%. And then you got everything.
If you go HEL, highly
Yep.
erodible land, and RCS, I mean,
Mhm.
Then you encompass a lot of areas that maybe might not be encompassed.
most everything east of here, everything's HEL. We got just about nothing that isn't.
So maybe that's a better term. And then you have things need to be done accordingly to
Yeah,
prevent erosion,
these types of crops.
soil loss,
Soil erosion, the
erosion,
compaction.
water runoff, whatever you want to use for terms. Instead of a number.
I see nodding, so, okay, good.
They're taking, is 5% what a B slope is? Is that the maximum slope on a B slope?
I don't know the old numbers, but like I said, the 5% is 20 feet a run and 1 foot a rise, and that's not, a lot of people wouldn't think that's very steep if they.
Well, yeah, in our neighborhood, we consider that flat.
Right, that's flat ground. I don't have ground that's less than that, but that's what I'm getting at. I think if you include the term highly erodible and measures to prevent erosion runoff, all those things can come into play.
My driveway is even that flat, to be honest.
Well, and then at least you have the ability to, instead of somebody saying, well, it's only 5%, we're
Right.
okay. We don't have to do that.
Good points. So the next one then is no portion of US SESO may be located within the special flood hazard area, including the 100-year and 500-year floodplain.
That's absolutely the most restrictive statement there, so.
Right. On page 33 or page 30, it's C, 3C, no portion. And on page 33, it is F,
Packet page 30.
packet page 33. Mhm. Yeah, packet page 30 and 33. One is 7F, the other was 3C.
AC.
Is that in the floodplain?
I did look recently and it wasn't. They would
How
have
did
had
that
to-
happen?
They got
I thought all of that
that
down there was
that
in the
piece
flood.
by Port Neal was pretty, yeah, that was in the zone X, not in a flood.
Okay, so
You're saying.
It just seems like you could strike
I'm
that. It seems like
asking.
we should strike that, but add,
I'm
follow,
asking
follow the appropriate.
Follow the flood plan.
regulations. Yes? Yes? Okay, I'm looking at everybody here. Okay, then application materials, it looks like it's all the same. For the most part, all the way through. They go, talked about foreign suitability rating already, so that would have to be
It says it has to be provided.
just calculated and provided. And it mentions 5% slope again. On, page I. On page 33.
Page 31?
Going
Page,
up to 30.
packet page
Packet
33.
31?
Yeah,
I
packet
would,
page 33. It's
Because I get that
8I.
5% here too.
Yeah.
I would suggest probably,
Removing any of that?
I would probably suggest staying up in consideration for, stick to page 30, 28.
Okay, just making sure I'm not missing anything here.
Yeah, you threw it in my grill.
Sorry.
No, actually, I went through it so much. That's
Yeah,
what it was.
I've been wanting to know the story on it. Let's see here. Spilled his lunch on it.
Okay. And then for whatever reason, I downloaded it off of and printed it off of county website. And I only got a partial packet. So I don't have anything beyond Like page 33,
That's-
34.
All the other stuff is all the other information you had before.
Okay, okay. Oh, it wasn't, okay, critical stuff.
Meeting minutes and.
Okay. Okay, so definitions, I mean, expanded conditional use permit, rough draft language, that's on packet page 10, all of that. That goes regardless of what one we use. Federation.
Yeah, and with each concept in there will probably need to be discussed and debated, including setbacks, and including the overall process, that the board would be looking for.
Okay. So consideration two then, intent, conditional use permit, those are all the definitions, right?
Yeah,
We don't need to change that. That's pretty much consistent with what we have.
or,
Page of 10 and 11. I'm jumping around here a little bit. 12.
Yeah.
a lot of those are newly introduced definitions.
Nothing, I mean, out of the ordinary. You want
That's,
to go through them all?
they're, we can, I mean, they're pretty much, standard across the board type of definitions, but I do think that, we gotta look at the scope of the merit of doing this as well, because we're definitely gonna, if any of this kind of looks good, we still want to have it vetted, and, Joshua looked at it a little bit this week, and I'll report back to him kind of, generally where we're kind of looking, but, we're not gonna necessarily be I mean, we're gonna have the perfect language at this point. We wanna kind of get legally vetted through as well, from the definition standpoint.
And he's looked at all this.
He's looked at it some, but, I wanted to get it to the commission as well, and, can kind of continue the discussion here and kind of go back and forth, but we'll involve them in the process quite heavily too. So. Yeah, so, yeah, I do think ultimately we'll have to discuss setbacks and waivers and the decommissioning plans and all those things too. And, we're probably not gonna fit it all in the same night, so
Unless you want
I
to
would
stay
prob,
here.
I would probably suggest future work sessions in
Future.
between the meetings.
So at what point in time do you feel we've accomplished enough?
I think it's kind of up to the chair. I would say maybe reevaluate it next week. We're gonna have a public hearing on
Yes.
just in general on the subject, so that the public can tell us again how they feel about, the overall concept. And, I hope anybody that's listened to us tonight, once we get it up on the site, can kind of critique and, have further recommendations, and, we can learn some more from the public next week. And I would say after the meeting, maybe next week, we'll gauge another kind of work session, but still keep in mind harvest and everything
Sure.
too.
Is there anything in this packet that anybody wants to bring up now, or hot topic or whatever
My points out.
at this point? Participation, I think, with the public tonight, so that was good. Asked plenty of questions. If that's okay, so maybe we can move on to the rest of the agenda item. Thank you. Thank you. So the next one is item number 6 on the agenda, public comment on matters not on the agenda. Hearing any? Yes? Yeah. Yeah, we'll back up a little bit. Sure.
County brought up a little bit. They're along the Missouri River. I mean, the Mississippi River, and they have a total farmland acres of 219,935 acres. Compared Woodbury with 457,63. So they have less than half of the acres. Their population in that county is 174,170. Woodbury County's is 105,607. So they're about 70,000 less. The average CSR2 for Scott County, 72.4. They placed a maximum allowed CSR2 of 60. Actually, that eliminates solar. They did make some comments that they were opposed to that. The following counties that have ordinances in place, and I don't think they have CSR cutoff, but we have Louisa County that already has a facility. I think it's about 140 to 150 megawatts. Their CSR is 67.3, CSR2. Johnson County has a contractor working with, and I think Mid-American might be involved there. Their CSR2 is 65. Mills County has 71.8. Worth County has 73.8. Lynn County has 68.1. So Lynn County, and I saw some of you had this utility scale solar scorecard there. I think it's designed for soil preservation incentives, just to maximize the quality of the soil for when the land is returned for agricultural production. Right here in Woodbury County, our average for CSR2 is 61.4. One of the things I heard talk about a little bit was with this scorecard. I talked about seed. I visited with Melbourne Seed, and they're the ones that are doing a lot of the CRP seeding. They have a special solar seed mix, but they have a variation on it. I think somebody made the comment that it could be overwhelming. Make sure that we have the right seed mix. Those seed mixes come out, they're custom. They're tagged in the bag, so it should be accurate. And
Monitor what's growing.
Pardon?
Somebody has to monitor what's growing, though.
Yeah, and in that seed mix, they're supposed to guarantee it on the tag. The other thing that I noticed was a 1% for 4 years was one of the comments. 1% of the farmland over a 4-year period. And I think that 5,700 acres for 4 years. I think that's not too bad because projects take anywhere from 2 to 5 years to grow, and you're looking way out. When 1 4-year passes, you're going to be into a second or third. I don't think it would ever catch up, but I think it would help monitor them a little bit. I think the overlay district just complements the current use that we have right now. Thanks.
Saying, I think the overlay is, my big thing is, I didn't think 5 people that were elected should be able to choose whether we do so many acres that it changes how our county looks. I think we have to have elected people have a say in that. So I really like that part of the overlay. The one thing that I worry about is as we put parameters on this, we could end up putting parameters on where there's no land that actually exists to meet those parameters. And all that does is open us up for litigation. So it's really difficult without looking at specific areas to know. I mean, because once you go below 65 in the hills, there isn't any land below 5% slope, it doesn't exist. And, you know, I kind of agree with Leo. CSR 1, in my opinion, was way more accurate than CSR 2. But I do think from that outlet where our county is so difficult to, we have such a wide variety in such a short amount of distance. I do think it's just wise to give the supervisors more than one option. Because I do think keeping it in the commercial is an option. One of the big hurdles with this is to be part of a conditional use. You have to meet that hurdle of necessary or desirable. When we've got thousands of acres sitting in industrial and that aren't being utilized, and I think it's a real high hurdle for these people to come up with on how is this necessary to the rest of AP? How does solar panels become necessary to fit into the rest of AP? Not just in that overlay, but in the whole ag district. I think that's a big hurdle. And I think, you know, if all our regulations and everything, if we end up just chasing our tail, from a legal standpoint, we're better off legally leaving it in industrial. But I wouldn't, I think you're right. I think they want to see things, but I would leave that as a potential option.
Offer this as
I mean, do we need a motion to accept or no?
Technically not a public hearing, so I would
Technically, we
prefer
can't.
probably bring it next week.
Bring it next week? Are we sticklers on where our sources of information come from? Just in general? I mean, it could be hearsay. Could it be statistics from a location?
I personally am a stickler. I'm not listening, just, I try to vet everything that no matter what subject, whether it's here at school, at home. You gotta be,
Verify sources?
yeah, you gotta be.
So not hearing any other public comments. Did we go past the public comments on things not on the agenda? Okay, commissioner comments or inquiries is the next item. Staff update is the next item.
I do got something.
We should have fixed the agenda.
I know, we gotta amend that. Okay, go ahead.
I got some really kind of exciting news. The county zoning has a group statewide called COZO, which is a group of county zoning administrators that meet typically for a conference every year. Plus, we meet, we're part of the ISAC, which is a organization that affiliates the counties all together into different chapters, whether you have the county engineers, zoning people, et cetera. Well, they picked Woodbury County for their conference location. Yay.
Sounds like dollars to me.
Sounds like a lot of work.
So May 22nd to the 24th, they're having a conference, and I'd encourage you to come because they will take a series of topics. They might even talk about solar or things going across the state. And we learn about it, how other jurisdictions are doing things. We learn best practices. And so it's kind of a nice event. And I think most of it will be hosted down at the Hilton Garden Inn at that time period. And anyhow, I might need some help because on May 23rd.
Hey, look at
Hey, elections come up in January. I'm out.
If I could pick everybody's brain on some great stuff to showcase Woodbury County, from 12:30 to 4:30 on the afternoon. It's a Thursday on the 23rd. We like to find an opportunity to show our county off in certain ways to the rest of the state. So if there's any, zoning based issues, or there's any, things out there that you're proud of and really want to show, or an event, a facility, a farm ground, They even said they'd be interested in floodplain based issues, so.
Nature Center.
Sounds like a party.
Here is the floodplain. But anyhow, that's something to look forward to, and I'll probably be maybe talking to you at certain points, get some ideas, let me know.
Sure.
Maybe you did.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, ideas.
Ideas to showcase would
Yeah.
vary.
Okay,
That's exciting.
excellent. Excellent, thank you. All done? Okay, all right. Number 9 on the agenda is adjourn.
Motion.
Got a second? All in favor? Thank you. Okay.